The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they are told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident.
Minimum 200 above. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Retard.
Get to the chopper. Hear me now, believe me later.
You're pretty good at that.
Did I tell you about the story about Sacramento Tower?
No.
So back in the day when we were at Sandpiper, and I was based in LA when they opened up the jet base there, and I used to do these trips like LA to Sacramento and back, you know. And it was one Sunday afternoon. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of California, and I was flying with a pretty cool guy, you know, and I was an FO, and I was having a good time. And at Sacramento Tower on a Sunday is pretty dead. There's like 4 commercial flights a day going in there. So here we are, middle of the afternoon, and it was just a turn for us. And we're coming in, and the approach controller clears us for the visual and off to the tower for a base leg. And I look at my captain. He's flying. I'm on the radios, and I go, Sacramento Tower, this is Sandpiper 1234 on the visual, landing on the runway. And the captain looks at me mortified, and the tower controller is cracking up laughing. He goes like, "Oh, Arnold, I didn't realize. Must be your day job on the weekend." I was like, "That's right." You know, and so they're like, "Oh, you're cleared to land. You're cleared the option. Anything for you." You know, and I go, "Understand, we're going to land. You will like it." And so the captain looks over at me just like, "Don't ever do that again."
Are you kidding me?
The tower controller was cracking up. He was like, "All right, Sandpiper, you are cleared to exit the runway. You can taxi the gate any way you want, sir." And I was like, "Thank you. We'll see you later. Bye." We were dying laughing. Oh my God.
That's
We
great,
got all the way to the
dude.
gate. My captain looks at me. He's like, Don't do that. I just don't.
I'd be like, why?
What is wrong with you? This is the way I talk.
You
Are
don't
you
like
racist?
me anymore? What's wrong with you?
You in Austria, this is the way we talk.
You got a tumor now or something?
It's not a tumor. Shut up. Who is your daddy and what does he do?
It's a valid question with him. Anyway.
You know, the day that this job becomes a job and not a passion, I'm gonna be looking for other employment. I've been practicing. Welcome to Walmart. Would you like a basket? I'm just saying.
Just saying, oh man.
Well, anyway, let's get started. You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast dedicated to the journey and the challenges surrounding the life and career of Aviator Tony, his co-hosts, and his guests. Together, we will explore the many pathways to an aviation profession, the realities of what a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 56 of Squawk Ident, recorded on the 25th of September, 2020, from the Aviator Sound Studios from somewhere in Southern California. On today's show, I am joined by an extraordinary pilot and co-host, Mr. RobD. Together, we will explore many topics today, from what happens when a pilot calls in sick to holding over DFW, waiting for them to change the runways around. That's right, they physically pick them up and move them into the direction of the wind. On the last show, we also mentioned that we were going to discuss overflying Cuba, but because of time constraints, that topic was cut from the show. We're going to make sure that we get to that today. Also, the 737 MAX. It's coming back, and training has begun. All this and more on this episode of Squawk Ident. But before we begin, let us take a moment to thank Captain John H. from episode 55, Restricted Medicals, French Simulators, Lasers, and 9/11. I personally learned a great deal about how so many aviators out there have overcome some tremendous obstacles and still continue to have successful aviation careers. Thanks again, John, for sharing your story with us. Before we get any further, let us start out by introducing one of my fantastic Squawk Ident co-hosts. He is a former international professional racquetball champion, a member of the 9G Club, an AMP and avionics tech, an RC aircraft commander, and a 737 pilot for Legacy Airlines. From his fortress of isolation from somewhere in Flower Mound, Texas, where he is recovering from a long week of flying with Jerry Springer guests from around the country. For those of you too young to know who Jerry Springer is, look up Phil Donahue and prepare to get woke. Please help me in welcoming back to the show, RobD. Rob, how the heck are you?
What's up, Tony? I'm doing really good. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. So, crazy week.
Yes.
We've been busy, which, is
Me too.
always a blessing, I think.
Yeah.
What have you been up to?
Yeah. Well, I've been busy too. Flew a 3-day trip, and it was a pretty good trip. Operationally, no delays really to speak of. Started off on the first day, which was Tuesday. We flew DFW to Phoenix, and got to Phoenix fairly early. Got there about 10 o'clock in the morning, so I had all day to kill. So nothing really crazy, just went out for a walk and got some exercise in, and then me and the captain joined up for dinner, and we went and had dinner at Garcia's, which is a really good restaurant in Phoenix, Mexican restaurant. Been around for I think it's close to 30 or 40 years.
Wow.
So if anytime you're in the Phoenix area, actually I think they have them out there in California too. They're called Garcia's. Excellent margaritas, by the way. So that was a good overnight. Great meal. Great conversations with my captain. The next day we did a Vegas turn, and went after we got back to Phoenix. We did Phoenix to St. Louis. Quick overnight in St. Louis. Nothing to speak of there. No real surprises on any of the flights that day. Got to St. Louis, spent the night there. And then the last day, the third day, which was Thursday, yesterday, we flew from St. Louis to Dallas, and then we did a Mexico City turn. And Mexico City is it's pretty hazy down there and a lot of terrain. I think you've been down there before.
Oh, yeah.
But it was still pretty slow, aviation wise. There wasn't that much traffic going in there. I heard a couple of the Mexican carriers flying in.
Mhm.
I think United was flying in there, and I think I heard a FedEx guy also going in at the same time. But usually, that's a really busy airport, and it didn't sound that busy that day. But on the way back, it got a little interesting coming back into Dallas. Not sure if you're ready to talk about it, but yeah, it was just getting back, headed back to Dallas. We were working on probably the 5th, 6th hour of our 8-hour flying day. So we're pretty much on the backside of the power curve as far as energy level goes. And we had just crossed over the border and checked on with Houston Center, and they gave us a different arrival than what we were cleared. So
Oh.
in DFW, the RNAV arrivals are pretty much are set up predicated on the direction or the flow of the arriving aircraft into DFW, whether it be a north flow or a south flow. So when we first got cleared into DFW, we had a north flow arrival, and we got checked in with Houston. They gave us a different arrival for a south flow. So me and the captain looked at each other. We pulled up the latest weather report, the ATIS, and it says they were still in a north flow. So I queried the controller. I said, "Hey, are they switching the airport around?" And they're like, "Well, they haven't done it yet, but they're getting ready to, and that's why we're issuing you the new revised arrival clearance." They're like, "Okay." So we programmed the computer, the FMC, the flight mode computer for the new arrival to reflect the change of runway operations in Dallas. And as soon as we checked on with Fort Worth Center, which is the the controllers that work all the arrivals into Dallas, they said, "Hey, advise when you're ready to copy holding instructions."
Nice.
Dun, dun, dun. So, of course, we're just like, man, this is the last thing we need is a hold. Usually when they turn the airport around, it really is pretty quick, and you rarely have to hold because they can space out the aircraft with the way that the traffic has been lately, pretty light. But Dallas being one of the busiest airports in the world, we're still operating at a pretty high capacity right now. So they issued us a hold, and so we went into a hold. And we started off at the hold at like 32,000 feet, and we descended down to 24,000 feet, and we held there for, it was about 5 minutes while they turned the airport around.
Yeah.
And finally, we were getting ready to query them because we didn't really have that much time to hold. We had about 10 minutes of holding fuel on board. And so right when I was about to ask them, "Hey, how long is this hold going to be?" Actually, I forgot to tell you, they gave us an EFC time, which I don't know if those aviators out there know what that stands for. It's instrument words for expect further clearance. So basically, it's a time that we can expect another clearance from the controller. And they give you that time basically for contingency purposes, like if you lose radio comms while you're in the hold. This EFC time is a hard time that the controllers give you. If you lose comm, you can now proceed from your holding fix and continue on your route to your destination, so that you're not holding indefinitely and wondering what you should do if you can't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So anyway, EFC time. So we were coming upon our EFC time, which was about 10 minutes, which was about the time, as much time, like I said, we had in holding fuel. And when I began to query the controller, he's like, "You're cleared direct to this fix and continue on the arrival." So we were pretty relieved about that because as you know, Tony, we're regulated with flight time and duty time and all that stuff, and already coming up on 8 hours of flying that day, we were pretty much right up against our limitation. So if we would have diverted, it would have most likely meant that it would have been the final flight of the day.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be able to continue.
Stuck there.
Yeah. So we were able to continue back into Dallas, landed uneventfully, and taxied on into the gate, cleared customs, and off I went. And so that was my week. It was I forget how many hours we flew, but I know yesterday was 8 hours plus of flying, 8 hours and 10 minutes, and did a total of 16 hours and 8 minutes in 3 short days. So
wow,
pretty good.
That's very good. And you brought up some really great points, and I'd like to dive into these a little bit more.
Yeah.
Number one, most importantly, when you drink or order a margarita, do you do salt on the rim or no salt?
That's a good question. Some people do sugar too, right? Have you heard of that?
Like the strawberry margaritas, they do sugar.
Yeah. I do salt.
You do the salt.
I like the salt.
And do you do blended or do you do cube?
Well, these came blended.
They come
Some people like them on the rocks. Yeah. These were frozen. They were good, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I only had one. I'm not much of a drinker, so one is all I need. And
one and done.
Really
I'm the same way.
Yeah, one
I'm a
and
cheap
done.
date.
But yeah, me too. That's what the captain says. Like, I'll bring you out to dinner anytime because this is a cheap dinner for me. So,
yeah.
But yeah, it was good, man. I really enjoyed it. Normally, I don't normally have an alcoholic beverage for dinner. That's just not my first choice, So, but this one just the right time, right place. It
especially
was
a hot
good.
summer
really
evening or lunch.
Yeah.
And, especially
it's really
Phoenix.
dry
I mean,
out
come
there.
on. So let's dive into what happened. So you flew a week. You've had what I would say is like a regular trip. No major events. No delays. Major delays of any kind. You stayed within the parameters of your original schedule, but you did come up against a couple barriers. One was you mentioned your flight time, duty time periods. You mentioned you flew a little bit over 8 hours, which now, depending on what your start time is for the day, with FAR 117, which is the
Right.
Federal Aviation Regulation that regulates rest requirements for pilots, and which is all encompassing with duty time and flight time. So you have to look at your home base time, and you have to look at what time you started that day, regardless of
Right.
where you are in the country or in the world. And you have to figure out, okay, how much rest did I get? What time am I starting? And you go through the charts that they have, and you can look these up.
That's
You
right.
can Google these things relatively easily, and you see your limit's like 9 hours. Right. So for you, for that day, your limit was 9 hours, and you were blocked to fly 8 hours and 10 minutes. So you had a 50-minute buffer. Now, if on that very first leg that you flew for the day, that got delayed in the air, and you went over an hour delay in the air, so you flew an hour longer than scheduled, they would have had to have removed you from the other legs, potentially. And then you'd be stuck somewhere to get your mandatory rest before you can come back, usually with a deadhead or something. So you were getting pretty close.
Yeah.
But what I'd like to focus on a little bit is your holding. Now, for those people out there that may not be everyday aviators or haven't started their instrument training yet, that is something that is kind of scary for someone who's a private pilot and they just got their PPL and they're like, oh, now I'm ready to go study my instruments. And they realize that, you get a taste of it during your private pilot training. But then once you really start diving into the rules and regulations, you realize that everything is set up for a reason. You mentioned EFCs, which I'd like to talk a little bit about, and you mentioned switching their airports around. So let's talk about the airports. So you were coming in from the south, obviously, from Mexico City, which is another topic. If we have time, we'll kind of get into that. But and they gave you an arrival that was not what you had filed. So
Correct.
The first red flag went up. And I like you queried ATC and said, hey, okay, what's going on? And they explained it to you. When they give you a holding clearance, do you recall what it was?
Yeah, it was. And I actually, before I dive into that, one little minor detail that I miss, which really doesn't, it plays into the big scheme of things, but I kind of overlooked it, was when we checked on and they gave us the revised arrival, as they said, slow to your slowest practical speed.
Ah, yeah, that's a good one.
And that's a good one too, right? And going on to, it'll probably lead into, add more detail to the discussion, but obviously that is to provide more time for them to turn the airplane around as we approach the airport. So we slowed down to, I think it was 220 knots was our slowest speed at that altitude. So
yeah, and how do you get that with the swept wing jet aircraft? Do you just arbitrarily slow to a particular speed?
Right.
Is there like an indicator on your airspeed? I know on the Airbus there's a green dot, which is the slowest speed possible in that configuration.
Yeah. So we don't have a green dot. I think we have what we call an up bug, but that up bug is honestly, I believe that is only for takeoff and drift down stuff. Honestly, I need to review the books on that. I'm sorry, but we on our airspeed indicator, probably like the Airbus, we have low speed awareness and overspeed awareness symbols on it. So what we normally do is give ourselves about a 10 knot buffer on the low speed awareness indicator. So that, obviously you don't want to go slower than the low speed awareness, because then you start triggering a whole bunch of alarms on there. So 220 at the altitude that we were at was about the right airspeed for that. And we also have in the FMC
the flight management
selections
for those,
flight management computer for like long range cruise. It'll give you recommended holding speeds, which we always add a buffer to that, because usually the recommended holding speed is like right at that low speed awareness tape. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, you can go down to here, but if you go below it, you start triggering all kinds of alerts
Right.
and stuff like that. So we always stay above that. So,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's I don't know if we answered the original question, but
Yeah, the speed and
that's
what
what it
speed
was.
you yeah. And so
Yep.
you slow to your speed, and that also makes sense, and I don't know if you kind of scratched the surface on this, but all right, so you're en route, and all of a sudden
Yep.
ATC says you can expect holding. If they haven't given it to you,
Correct.
I believe, you and I have talked about this before, the first thing you should query the air traffic controller is, can we slow to a speed at our discretion?
That's right.
Because why are you in a hurry to get to a holding fix and turn in circles for an
Right.
hour where maybe you can slow down and slow to a more practical, slow
Efficient, fuel
airspeed?
efficient.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. And now when you get to that, when you finally get to that holding fix, maybe by then you may not have to hold at all.
Exactly.
So
No, that's the whole theory.
yeah, so you slowed. They gave you the holding instructions, and that's what
Yep.
I was asking. So they probably said
Right.
legacy, 1, 2, 3. What was your clearance like? Do
But
you remember?
yeah, so the initial call was legacy 123 advised and ready to copy holding instructions, and we're like, okay, stand by, and we got a pen and paper out. Opened up the arrival chart so that we can reference the fixes on the chart,
Hmm.
and they said, all right, you're cleared directly to the Kilo intersection. Hold over Kilo as published. Descend and maintain flight level 240. EFC is 2105. So I read back the clearance, cleared direct to Kilo, descend to 240. Hold is published, EFC 2105. So built the hold in the compute in the FMC, went direct to the hold. We were at 34,000 feet at that time, I believe, or 35,000, and we descended as we made our way to the hold. We were still above 24,000 feet when we entered a hold, and we descended from like 30,000 feet down to 24,000 feet and held um, at the Kilo intersection
Hmm.
for it was about 10 minutes. Yep.
Yeah. So you descended in as soon as you cross that holding fix. Now you have to verify it's sterile cockpit at that point because
Right.
both pilots are very focused on making sure that the airplane's doing what you anticipated it would do.
Exactly.
And so now you've entered the hold. You can see that the your MFD or your MD changes. Now there's a hold depicted that is now activated, and the little airplane on your moving map display starts to turn. You're like, okay, I'm entered the hold. So
Exactly.
you got a
Yep.
time, tune, twist, throttle, talk, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what the GA
Right.
holding.
Turn, or tune, time, twist, throttle, talk.
Yeah,
Yeah, all
something
that.
like that. Yeah.
The
So you
TTTs.
told
Yep.
ATC, hey, we've entered the hold, and
Right.
as you're descending through there and into your
Yep.
protected
One of the
airspace.
required reports. Yep.
Required report, yeah. And so now you're holding, and the passengers in the back, they know this, right? Because they feel the airplane going in a circle. It's always like leaning to the right or leaning to the left,
Yep. Yep.
Usually the captain turns on the seatbelt sign, makes a PA, lets them know what's going on, has to notify the flight attendants of what's
Exactly.
happening, because the flight attendants, they do this for a living. They know, oh, crap, why are we
Yep.
holding, there's no weather,
Yep.
why are we holding? And it takes time for the aircraft operations to reverse the flow. So you have maybe 5 or 6 airplanes coming in to land in the south direction. And now you have to wait until that very last airplane lands, clears the runway, before you can start letting airplanes come in into the north direction, landing north.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
that's why you're holding, because you're kind of waiting for this protected area to be cleared, so you don't have 2 airplanes pointed at each other, basically.
Exactly.
Now, when this happens, this doesn't just affect the airport operations. This affects operations downstream all the way through somebody who might be on the ground at a particular airport that
That's
now
right.
has there's no weather and they're taxiing out. Maybe I'm in Vegas ready to go to DFW, and they're like, yeah, there's flow into DFW. Your EFC is, or your edict time, your
Edict,
estimated
yep.
departure clearance time. Your edict
Yep.
time is now, 20 minutes from now. And you're like, what?
What?
What the hell is going on? Why?
The weather's beautiful
What are they,
out
nuts?
there. Why would they do
Every
this?
time I leave Vegas, this is the crap they pull. Well, it's because it's all happening like a domino effect downstream. Now, by the time you
That's
take
right.
off, you're going to be able to catch up, no problem. It's not a big
Yep.
deal. Or
Basically, they fill in the gaps as you get airborne as they can.
right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to this. And, in the airplane, we're doing more than sipping coffee and reading newspapers at cruise, pushing that cruise button on that autopilot. I don't think so.
Most people don't realize, I mean, when you are issued a holding clearance, it gets pretty busy up in the cockpit. I mean, there's certain things, and you already alluded to most of it, when we have to talk to the passengers, talk to the flight attendants. Of course, the required report to ATC is there. And also we let our dispatchers know what's happening too, so that they're in the loop. Most likely they're already in the loop. But they definitely love, or I think it's required that we contact them with the information that we've received from ATC,
sure.
So that they can monitor our progress. And more importantly, the whole reason we do this is basically for safety. We want to make sure we track our fuel burn, because as you all know, or most of us know, we don't carry full tanks of gas around all day long. We only plan to arrive at the airport with a certain amount of fuel, and we have contingency fuel, which is usually 45 minutes past our destination or alternate airport, and then a little bit of contingency fuel for holding, which in our case we ended up using, and that's it. So once you burn through that contingency fuel, you need to be going to an airport to land, whether it be your destination or your alternate. So that was a long way of just saying we're busy up there monitoring and calculating our bingo fuel. Bingo is a aviation buzzword for lowest amount of fuel we need to have in the tanks before we start going somewhere. So we end up departing the hold safely and getting to where we need to be.
I need to pull out my metal E6B and pull that out and keep it in my kit bag. And next time I enter a hold, I'm going to look to the captain and be like, "Don't worry, I got this." I got this, man. Yeah.
So it's 4.1. Is that 41 that I use?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun stuff.
Look at me and like,
it all works. It all applies today in the airplane.
Like, oh yeah,
get to work.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So no, it does get very busy, and absolutely everything you mentioned comes into play. Now, this all can come into play in a matter of about 2 and 3 minutes, because
that's right.
As soon as you enter the hold, the non-flying pilot, like you said, has got to notify ATC. They're going to notify dispatch. Dispatch, the first airplane that went into hold for that segment, all the other airplanes that they're working are going to now have all right, ding, ding, here it goes. Let's get ready for this. So they're already calculating fuel. Now, do you remember, did you have a destination alternate that day?
No, we didn't.
You didn't.
The weather was good. There was no alternate. So
when the dispatcher, filed your flight plan and calculated the fuel necessary to conduct this flight from an international destination to Dallas-Fort Worth, they put in there the FAA minimum, which is 45 minutes of what we call now dynamic fuel reserves, which changes. It's not a how many pounds of fuel, because that's how we measure fuel in an airplane. We don't go by gallons, we go by pounds.
Right.
Now, the guy down there on the ramp that's loading the airplane loads gallons into your airplane.
Right.
However, they have a conversion chart, because everything in our paperwork and the dispatch paperwork is by pounds, because it's all about weight and balance. So they calculated that, and usually they have a buffer in there. They sometimes have, if there's no alternate required, sometimes they'll have some what's called dispatch add, where the dispatcher will add a couple thousand pounds of fuel for just this scenario. Because the last thing you want to do is have a relatively short flight where it's clear in a million, day VFR, you have 45 minutes of dynamic reserve, which doesn't give you much, and now you're getting there and something happens and now you're holding. Okay? Now,
worst case scenario,
you've got minutes to figure this out, because if that airport doesn't open up or that runway doesn't open up, and now you're stuck there and you're eating into your 45 minutes of reserve, you better hope that there is a good, acceptable alternate airport within that fuel range. Otherwise, you're now declaring an emergency.
Fuel range, not gliding range.
Yeah,
fuel range.
Fuel range. Yeah. I remember one time, actually, you've kind of sparked this memory that I had many, many moons ago. I was flying a leg, I think it was Columbus to DFW, back in the Sandpiper days. And, day VFR, we take off, and a fog bank just happened to appear, what they call ground fog or Thule fog, that just surrounded the DFW airport. And we came in, and we're flying at the time the Embraer 145 jet. And they said, all right, approach control said, you're cleared for the ILS. We were a Cat 1 only at the time. So with 200-foot overcast and a half-mile visibility is required prior to starting the approach. Right. And as soon as they gave us clearance for the approach, they said RVR was 1,500, 800, 400. So
1,600's our minimum, right?
Or is it 16 or 18?
Was it 16?
I think it was 18.
Probably 18.
1,800 RVR.
Right. Yeah.
With the flight director or autopilot or HUD. So we needed 1,800 RVR minimum. And there's three numbers. There's the touchdown of the runway, the first third. There's the midfield, the second third, and there's the rollout. And sometimes even have a far end. Mm-hmm. At the time, the runway we were going to use was below the minimum. So you cannot accept that approach. Right. So we talked to the tower and we said, well, we need 1,800 RVR minimum for the touchdown, because on an approach, at least for the company we were flying for at the time, that was the controlling RVR. The others were just informational purposes at that point for a landing. So we told them we need at least 1,800 RVR. We can't shoot this approach. And they said, okay, well, fly the localizer, maintain 3,000. They brought us around, did a downwind, came back around. Everybody behind us, same scenario. The only ones that were getting in were the Cat 2 or Cat 1 or Cat 3 airplanes, the large or the narrow body aircraft that had that capability. So here we were with like a parade of Sandpiper Embraers and CRJs doing the circuit around the east side of the airport. Well, we had an alternate because the weather was in the TAF. Mm-hmm. And although it was not expected to be that low, our alternate was Abilene, which, if anyone's familiar with the Fort Worth area, Abilene is to the west of DFW.
That's right.
So we had enough fuel to do at least one more pass before we had to get out of there. So we told them, all right, we need 1,800 RVR to land. Let us know if it goes back up above 1,800 RVR. We can accept an approach at that time. And the approach controller says, okay, RVR 2,000, 1,500, and 800. And we're like, oh, perfect. We can accept it. So we come the corner, returning base to final. They said, all right, you're clear the ILS 17 center, I think it was. RVR 1,400.
I'm
like, you just
told me 2,000.
We can't accept this approach. It needs to be 1,800. All right, fly the localizer. And now it's like, okay, my captain who was pilot monitoring was like, we need to go to Abilene now. We don't have enough fuel to mess around. I'm like, I agree. So he said, we need to go to our alternate. We need Abilene. All right. So they vectored us to downwind at 5,000 feet. And now we're like going north of the airport. We're still kind of going in the wrong direction. We're like, hey, we need to go to Abilene now. And the controller goes, well, I got to get you clear of the class Bravo unless I get you above. I'm like, we're requesting 15,000 feet or higher. We need direct Abilene now. So they're like, all right, clear to, I think they gave us 14,000 feet. As soon as you clear 10,000, you're cleared direct to Abilene. So we get up to 14,000. Now we're going direct to Abilene. We're calculating the fuel. And actually, it was me flying, and the captain was pilot monitoring. And the captain says, hey, I'm watching this fuel, and it's not looking too good. That last vector really sucked up a lot of gas at low altitude. I'm like, well, let's do this. Let's go direct. You just pulled the weather. It's VFR. Let's just get pilot's discretion. We'll stay as high as long as we possibly can, and I'll do a CDP, a continuous descent profile. That's when you calculate what you need. you bring the engines to flight idle, nose it over, and just basically, flight idle
Yep.
all the way down to traffic
Good
pattern
energy
altitude.
management for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do that. And at that point I had, 4,000 hours on the airplane. It's not like I was new on the aircraft. And he's like, I don't know, man, you look kind of high. We do not have the fuel to go around here. I mean, we're already in our reserves. And I was like, I got this, man. I got this. And it was a parade of airplanes. We were number one. It's a parade of airplanes flying to Abilene for the alternate because no one can get in. And, we're passing through 10. I'm starting to really focus on, okay, I don't want to be high. I don't want to get low. I want to manage my fuel.
Just get on profile and do it. Yeah.
About 5,000 feet, he goes, dude, you are high. I'm like, I'm not high. Trust me. So I like, gear down, flaps, whatever, 1 or whatever
20,
it was then.
Yeah,
22
flaps
or
9,
9 degrees. Yeah. And it's all right, bringing it. Now he's like, oh, you got the gear down. That's really early. I'm like, I got this, man. I got this. Come in all the way. I don't think I added power until the last couple hundred feet just to soften the touchdown. It was a nice touchdown, rolled off the runway, and the ramp is full of airplanes. It was full of Saabs. It had a couple ATRs there. And so they have like 2 gates there. It was all ramp parking. All the airplanes were sitting there with their APUs running and just all the people on board. And we were the first ones to get fuel that day. I remember. And people are on the radio like, why did they get fuel? Like, oh, they have a time critical international connections, blah, blah, blah. Some bull crap like that. And so here we are, we fueled up, and within 20 minutes, we're back in the air, head back to Dallas, this time with a lot of fuel. I think we could have shot like 10 approaches and still had plenty of fuel. And we got in.
Story.
We got in. But this is some of the things we do.
Yeah, you deal with. Yeah,
fuel is everything.
Yeah,
right.
Sure
You remember the 3 total wastes in aviation?
Yeah, is it the fuel truck, the fuel you left in the fuel truck, the runway you left behind you, the was it the airspace above you, and
yeah, that's it.
There might be another one. Yeah,
yeah. Never leave it. Never leave runway behind you. Yep. Fuel on the ground, or altitude in the air. Yeah.
Exactly. Most useless thing to a pilot.
Yeah.
And when's the only time you'll ever have too much fuel?
When you're on fire.
Exactly.
And that's what, if you're ever on fire, what does ARF being the acronym for Airport Rescue and Firefighting. They took it away. Used to be, what is it? CFR? They used to call it CFR.
Crash, Fire, and Rescue.
And they said, no, we got to pull crash out of that acronym.
Yeah.
So now it's Airport Rescue.
You're not allowed to crash anymore.
No,
so.
That's not authorized.
That's funny.
The last part of your story, you talked about how you were reaching kind of the end of your duty period and how, being late in the afternoon. And this was yesterday, yeah?
That was yesterday.
Yeah. And because we were originally going to record yesterday. And I looked at your schedule and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work out.
Rob?
So I texted you and I said, like, if I know you flew a lot today, if you want to do this tomorrow, we can. He's like, yes, I'm exhausted.
Yeah. Originally, I thought I was going to be able to do it, but I got home and I was just mentally drained, So it was nice of you to give me the pass and record today. We were able to push it off till today because got home and thankfully my wife had dinner made and just pretty much laid on the couch for the rest of the evening and fell asleep 3 or 4 times watching a movie.
Lucky.
I was useless. I tell myself in those situations, never, ever touch power tools.
Yes. Yeah, I think we've talked about this in the show. After a particular time in the day, after so many hours, do not come home from a trip and touch a power tool.
No, sir. You will hurt yourself or maybe worst case scenario, kill yourself if you're using a power tool after a day like yesterday. Our job is flying is it's exhausting in the mental sense. There's a lot of a lot of wasted brain. I wouldn't say wasted, but there's a lot of used brain energy that goes into flying. You're always, mentally calculating, like we talked about, the fuel, your duty day, your contingencies if anything happens, and just it's a constant process, while you're flying. And you've been doing it for a long time. You really don't, even though you don't think that you're thinking about it, you are constantly going through the scenarios in your mind, or just that's how you operate an airplane. You
Yeah.
always got to be ready for the unexpected. So it's exhausting at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's why I
Yep.
think the FAA has been so good about making sure that there's no kind of repercussion for a pilot to call in sick.
That's right.
And, it's if a pilot ever tells you, I went through 2019 and never called in sick one time, that should raise a red flag. I mean, I'm a relatively healthy guy myself, and I rarely ever feel the need to call in sick because I have, my method of preparing for trips. And, the day before, I do kind of am I well enough to work, a wellness for work, or a fit for duty assessment.
Right.
And that's when you really have to go, okay, if I feel like I'm not going to be 100%, I need to call in sick now so that they can cover the trip with a reserve pilot or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah. Let's talk about what happens when you call in sick. I came across an article recently because I was doing a little bit of research of like what constitutes sick. And our company manuals tells you what to do if you call in sick. It tells you how to clear a sick, who to call. If you go to a doctor, does that constitute having to get cleared from sick? If you get hospitalized, go in for a simple outpatient procedure, do you then have to clear that through your company's medical department? Do you have to let your chief pilot know? If you're on an overnight in Mexico, can you get that plastic surgery that you were always wanting to do and then show up with bandages on your nose? Yes, that's a true story. Not to me, obviously. but I've heard many a thing about what happens when you should call in sick. I did come across an article from avgeekery.com. And I'll have a link in the show notes. January 7th of 2017, it was a pretty funny article entitled, I'm a pilot. I feel okay, but I still called in sick. And this article is by Rob Graves. And in it, he talks about why pilots have a kind of a propensity to call in sick, even if they're not really what one would think is too sick to work. And he writes, to be fair, I really do have a bit of a cold. It started the day before my trip with some sneezing and a headache. It's really nothing most workers would consider staying home for. A daytime Theraflu has got me feeling almost fine, but I still didn't go to work. Instead, I called scheduling to get myself pulled off the trip and replaced. Now that I've got some extra time to write a blog, am I lazy? Or is this a good call? And this is exactly the kind of question that we ask ourselves. Though it sounds like he writes that I'm milking the system, trust me when I say that you do not want me anywhere near your airplane for a number of reasons. The first, obviously, is that I'm not 100%. Flying places adds enough physiological stress on the body as it is, disrupting circadian rhythms, fatigue, dodgy airport food. That's a big one for me. And dehydration from hours in a dry airplane air can all contribute to the degradation of the alertness which is needed to operate an airliner. Throw in additional stressors such as congestion or a headache, and the effectiveness in the cockpit can drop precipitously.
Wow.
So he goes on to write, and I encourage you all to take a look at the link. Almost everything that can affect you, from taking over-the-counter drugs to help combat a flu or grogginess that comes from being fatigued or having a hard day or stresses in your life, can all degrade your effectiveness in the cockpit. So just because you're not sick in bed with a flu or a cold or corona doesn't mean that you should show up to flight, suck it up. As a pilot, you should be cognizant of your ability to perform at 100%. The FAA recommends a weight of 5 times the recommended dosage interval whenever taking an over-counter cold or flu medication. So if it says, 24 hours between doses, the FAA recommends 5 times that amount. So you need to be off 4 or 5 days so that it's out of your system. If you're taking something that has like a Theraflu with a sleep aid or something.
Yep.
So it's not like, oh, well, I'm sick today, but by tomorrow I should be fine to fly. So that means if the suggested certain dose is every 6 hours, a pilot should wait 5 times that amount. So 30 hours, more realistically. So it's always a good idea to make that assessment. And this doesn't just go for airlines. Whether you're flying a Cessna 172 around the pattern for another flight lesson, or you're behind the controls of a 787 as First Officer B, where you're just doing breaks at cruise on the way over to Hong Kong. I mean, it doesn't matter what your level is. If you're behind the controls of an aircraft, you really need to have a clear mind, because we are firing those electrons pretty quick when we're trying to juggle all the things we have to do. And then, by the way, here's your holding instructions. Now calculate your fuel. And you took a Benadryl yesterday
with the fuel. Can't miss the decimal point one way or another, because that can make a big difference in whether you end up landing with thrust or landing without thrust.
This article in Av8rTony.com ends with a pretty good paragraph here. It says, flying airplanes demands complete attention from alert and healthy pilots. With all the negative physiological stresses on members of this profession, having someone keep an eye on the pilot's health while he or she keeps an eye on your airplane maintains the high integrity and safety of today's aviation system. And there are so many resources that, Rob, you and I have to our disposal. We can call our union a medical advice line. We can call our medical advice line for our healthcare provider. A lot of times I've been posed a question from people either in general aviation or people that are interested in doing a little bit of research on pilots. Hey, I've got this medication. Is this safe to use? Can I take this? I've got this head cold and I want to get back to work quick. Can I take this? Even if I know the answer, my response is always, well, you have an FAA medical, you have a doctor, you have his phone number or her phone number, give him a call. Say, hey, before I take this medication, I want to make sure that I'll be safe to fly, because some medications, even though they're over the counter, are actually grounding items and could potentially have you lose your medical, even your license, if you get a random drug test.
And I know the FAA actually has a website that you can go to when it comes to prescription medications, and you can go to this particular website and see if it's approved or not allowed per the FAA. There's actually some of them that are approved, but with limitations. And it's a great thing to reference if you take medications or if you're about to be prescribed a medication, because not every doctor understands or knows about what the what is allowed or what's not allowed, prohibited from the aviation, from the FAA medical point of view. For instance, I actually had an eye exam a couple years ago, and this eye exam revealed that I had a little bit of an eye infection, and it wasn't pink eye or anything like that, but it came from the, I don't know, use of some contact lenses that have kind of irritated my eyes. So the optometrist issued me a eye drop that had a steroid in it. And I didn't think anything of it. I was like, okay, cool. This will clear up the problem I have. And it was just basically my symptoms were just, my eyes were really itchy, and they would, get a lot of mucus or whatever. So, I've always had to have a tissue with me to dry my eyeballs out, uh, and wear your glasses and not wear the contacts the whole time. But anyway, long story short, they issued me an eye drop steroid, and took the eye drop a few times. And I was like, yeah, this is great. This is helping out. And I was supposed to take it for like 2 weeks or something like that and just keep wearing glasses. And after, and this was, by the way, all on my days off. And I had a few days off coincidentally at this time. And just out of curiosity, I went to the website, the FAA medical website, and looked up this the drug or the eye drops that I was using, and to see if they were allowed. And it turns out that they were prohibited. So I was like, whoa, thank God I didn't go to work. The chances of somebody actually finding out is another thing, if I was using it. But, being a law abiding citizen, and, I want to keep my medical and I want to keep my job. I wanted to make sure that I am operating within the laws and bylaws and the regulations of the Federal Aviation Regulation. So I had to go back to my optometrist and said, hey, this particular eye drop is, I can't use it due to my job. Do you have anything that has this? Because they actually give you, in the FAA medical database, some alternatives that you can use. So I presented that to the optometrist, and they're like, oh yeah, sure, here, we could issue this. So that's how that was my experience with that. But it got me thinking, because I also had allergies before, Allegra D and Zyrtec, or some of those are not allowed.
Right.
So, make sure you check the database, because, some of these drugs may or may not, prescription drugs, even over the counter stuff, may or may not be allowed. And if they are allowed, there may be some limitations to it. For example, some of them you may be able to take as long as you need not take it within, 12 or 24 hours prior to operating the aircraft.
Right.
So, those are, for an example, that's some of the limitations that I've seen. So anyway, yeah, it's good stuff right there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the FAA website. I'll put a link in the show notes. I did find it here. It's
Okay,
a
good.
guide for aviation medical examiners, and it shows pharmaceuticals or therapeutic medications that would constitute a do not issue or do not fly order.
Perfect.
So,
Yep.
if you're curious and you're like, well, my doctor prescribed me this medication, you ask your doctor, well, is this approved for the FAA? They're not going to know unless they're
Right.
happen to be an
And
AME as well, an
Yeah,
aviation
exactly.
medical examiner. So if they're not, it's a quick phone call, or, if you have a smartphone, you just pull up your FAA.gov website, and in
Yep.
there, I mean, it has a long list here of the 3 classes of medication that would be a grounding item.
Yep.
So yeah, if you're curious, as simple as, hey, I'm got allergies, seasonal allergies, and I want to take this Benadryl that has antihistamine. Well, you can't take that because it has antihistamine. So you have to take a different. They have Benadryl you can take, or Sudafed you can take,
Right.
but you have to make sure you get the right one over the
Exactly.
counter. So
Yep.
yeah, definitely ask your local AME for guidance on this. You can also consult the web and find out what they have to say.
Very good. Oh, and another thing, the IAMSAFE checklist is a great checklist that any aviator could and should use to determine whether they are safe to fly. And it's an acronym, IAMSAFE, I'm safe. The ICE is an acronym for illness. Do you have any symptoms of an illness? Obviously, COVID is one of the most prominent ones these days. The M is for medication. Have I been taking prescription or over-the-counter drugs? And it leads you right down the path that we just talked about. You should go get that checked with an examiner or reference the website. Stress is a big one. It's a natural human factor. We all experience a certain amount of stress, and we do need to make sure we assess our stress level and determine whether it's acceptable for operating an aircraft. And keep in mind that stress at the time that you assess yourself may not be at a point that is affecting you now, but it could be in certain situations it may spike due to certain external events. So
Mhm.
stress is a big one. Of course, alcohol. You're not allowed to drink within 8 hours of flying an airplane. Um, and it says here within 24 hours, but I think our company rules 12 hours for the
Yeah,
bottle of
and
throttle. We call
well,
it.
that bottle to throttle, I remember that was big when I was learning how to fly, and
Right.
the FAA was 8 hours, and they called it bottle to throttle. That's an old, I think,
Right.
Navy term or
Way to
something.
remember
But
it. Yeah.
actually, they've changed our company manuals about 6, 7 years ago,
Mhm.
and now the verbiage you have to be really careful because it used to be a 12-hour rule. I'm not sure what it is at Legacy Airlines, but I'm sticking with the 12-hour rule.
Right.
And it used to be 12 hours from, you know, drinking to signing in for duty,
Right.
right? But they changed the verbiage. Now it's 12 hours free from all um, signs of any kind of alcohol in your system. So
Wow.
basically, you have to be sober
Yeah.
for 12 hours prior
12
to
hours.
showing up to your
That
sign-in
makes
time, your
sense.
van ride, whatever it is. And this was a huge topic that we've kind of, both of us as check airmen have really been pushed upon. And we used to have to talk about this during IOE, especially with new hires, because
Yep.
that's not, and especially in today's day and age, that's not something you really want to have to deal with at work.
Deal
Because
with.
now, I know I used to have a little, forgive the term, but come to Jesus moment with my new hires that I'd say,
Yeah.
outside of the cockpit, I'd say, okay, now here's the part where I give you my little speech. Whether or not you want to, agree with
Right.
it or comply with it is up to you. But,
I've had to
how
do that
many
myself.
years and how many dollars did it take for you to earn all your pilot's licenses and ratings and all those check rides you had to go through and all that stress you put yourself through to get here, to get your dream job? And
Yeah.
are you willing to risk it all to go and have what they call a big ass beer and, like, say downtown on Beale Street,
Yeah.
go listen to jazz music all night and drink all night and stumble into
Yeah.
the hotel and now
Yeah.
you're worried, did I give myself enough time to sober up? Am I feeling well? Are
And-
the effects of alcohol going to linger?
Yeah. And I used to take it a step further than that too. There are times where you get to a hotel on an overnight and you agreed, hey, we got a long overnight. Let's meet downstairs let's get a drink and some wings. And you show up at the hotel and it's late and it's almost last call. And, you have that urge, instead of going up to your room, to go right to the bar and order, whatever. And I tell them, I said, never, ever, ever get caught in a place that serves alcohol, like a bar, in your uniform, and more importantly, in a uniform with your company ID. Do not do that. That's just one thing you just don't do. That's a career ender right there. There's cameras. No.
Everyone has a recording studio in their pocket.
Exactly.
Everyone. I mean, 6-year-olds have a recording studio in their pocket. It's called a smartphone.
Oh,
and
man.
to walk, and I used to tell people the same thing. The minute you put your uniform on inside your hotel room or in your home and you walk out that front
Exactly.
door, you have to assume that all your neighbors, all the other people at the hotel, they're all filming you. Now,
Exactly.
I've been told, wow, you're a little paranoid, aren't you? I'm like, no, I'm not paranoid, because how many times do you see YouTube videos of, not just pilots, but people, being caught doing something they shouldn't have. And everybody wants to be famous for bringing to the world, aha, look what this guy did or this gal did.
Exactly.
Oh, I got a pilot. He was stumbling out of the van. Look, I got it all on video. And it ends up on CNN, pays you a couple $100,000 for that video so that they can now have breaking news. Don't be the butt of somebody else's fame.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with the the prominence of so much false news being spread around the world. They could take a video clip of you just having a not exactly a good moment getting out of the van or whatever, and then add whatever narrative they want to do to it and then publish that. And now it's not true, but now it becomes world news and you're caught right in the middle of it. The chances of that happening obviously are very rare, but like you said, that's the last thing you need. So yeah. So moving on. So that was the A in the IAMSAFE acronym. Alcohol, just don't do it.
Yeah.
F, fatigue. That's a huge factor in our industry. Am I too tired and not adequately rested? And I am guilty of this. You said you were working out in your backyard yesterday or something like that, cutting concrete and stuff like that. Yeah, you got to live your life, and there's certain times where you need to take advantage of the time you have in your day, and you may get out there and do some heavy manual labor or stay up late at night for whatever reason, or you have a sick kid, or like in my case, I had a sick family member. So you're kind of trying to take care of them, and that may, push you up against the amount of rest that you need to have to safely operate the airplane the next day. And if you just feel you can't do it, or you wake up the next morning and you just didn't get a good night's sleep in the hotel or at home, it's a good time to call in and say, hey, we still call it sick, but you're fatigued. You're too tired to work.
Yeah.
And then the last one for E is eating. Just making sure that you're adequately feeding nutrients and hydrating your body with the proper stuff. You can't go to work on an empty stomach because you get into high stress situations, and now your brain needs food to operate on or calories. And if you don't have any calories to supply it with, you can find yourself making some pretty poor decisions. And then further on down the road, you may not eat properly. That's the other thing, is eat properly, because that could that could also show some health issues down the road if you're not eating properly, with weight and diabetes and all the other ailments that come along with that. So anyway, that's just a little thing that I think everybody should use. And even use that if you're going to operate any heavy equipment too. It goes for everything. So,
yep. Eating right, staying hydrated, eating healthy, getting your exercise, all of it helps contribute to your mental acuity and your mental alertness. And when we talk about fatigue, most people think physically fatigued. I only got 5 hours of sleep, so I must be fatigued. No, you could have gotten 12 hours of sleep, but if you're stressed out, you got a lot of stuff going on. The mental fatigue is a very serious thing. And I think actually mental fatigue is a lot more dangerous than physical fatigue, because with physical fatigue, you can kind of go through it, muster through it until you get your rest. And when you get your rest, it's all like, okay, I'm rejuvenated. But with mental fatigue, it'll linger for days, months, even years. So
and to finish up the topic, I mean, that's exactly what ended up happening to me last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. I had a 3-day trip that I was supposed to fly, and I was exhausted. I was exhausted, and I hadn't called in sick or tired in a while. I mean, I think the last time I called in sick was probably maybe July or August of last year. And so this was the first time in a while. But it was just kind of one of those weeks where I had gone home to my home state of Rhode Island, and we were at a wedding and enjoyed ourselves, had a great time, and got home, and I think I did a podcast with you that very day that we landed. And after that, I was supposed to go to work, and I was like, oh man, I am so exhausted from all the events that just happened. I needed a me day to recover. And so I felt it was prudent to call the company and let them know that I'm, not going to make the next trip. And
you had podcast fatigue.
Yeah, I had podcast fatigue, and that's a real factor too.
That's the thing.
That's Tony.
It ain't easy, buddy. It ain't easy.
Yeah, it's harder for Tony than it is for me. But
Yeah.
oh man.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to have more on Latin terrain, overflying Cuba, the international quals, and the 737 MAX right after the break. Welcome back to the second half of the Squawk Ident podcast. Today we're sitting down with my co-host RobD, and we're talking about everything from fatigue to calling in sick. And now we would like to start on a segment that we talked about a little bit on the previous show that we didn't really get a chance to get into, and that's overflying an international destination like Cuba to get to the Caribbean islands. I had a trip a couple weeks back that was a pretty good 3-day trip. One of them was Charlotte to Montego Bay and then back to Charlotte. And we were overflying Cuba. So I had not ever flown into Montego Bay. So prior to the trip, I was doing a little bit of research, studying my EFB, my electronic flight bag, looking at our Jeppesen charts for the area to see if there was any kind of special procedure that I had to become familiar with. Now, we're overflying water, but we are not doing an ETOPS flight because there is land within an hour of our flight path. So it's not an ETOPS required flight. However, you are crossing in multiple international boundaries or FIRs, FIRs. And Rob, you mentioned what was a FIR?
Flight Information Region.
So what is that? So when you cross out of U.S. airspace and now you fly through an international airspace, there's a boundary, an imaginary line. And on our charts, it's depicted. What we had to do was cross into the MUFH FIR, which is the Havana FIR. Now, Havana Center controls the airspace over Cuba. Now, as long as you're on a IFR flight plan with prior permission and obviously a squawk code with Mode S and all the requirements that are now in place to overfly the Havana Center airspace, you're good to go. They know what time you're going to enter. You're under radar control. You're being handed off by Miami Center. And prior to entering the airspace, Miami Center will give you, just like a regular frequency change, they'll give you a frequency change, contact Havana Center on a particular frequency. And you sign in just like you would, legacy flight 123 over whatever fix it is at whatever altitude. And they'll get back to you, radar contact. And sometimes there's language barriers, heavy accents that you have to overcome. So all of our manuals and our company procedures indicate that this could be an issue in terms of communications, and you should speak clearly and directly without any added language, which is always a good idea anyway, but especially important when you're crossing into an international boundary. Yeah. So that's what we did. We contacted Havana Center. They basically gave us IFR tracking and traffic advisories and overflew Cuba, which was kind of cool. Looking down, I couldn't make up much, but I could see that it's a pretty lush, mountainous kind of area. Yeah. And once we cleared their airspace, they gave us another handoff to another FIR boundary, which is Port-au-Prince, the boundary. They gave us tracking all the way down until we landed over there at Montego Bay. Now, for those of you that go, Montego Bay, what's the airport diagram for that? It is You could find it on the Jeppesen charts or in the government charts under MKJS or Sangster International, which is a kind of cool name for an airport. Sangster.
It's almost like gangster.
Gangster. So they have one runway there, or I should say two runways, the reciprocal. And that is runway 25 and runway 7. So we did a visual approach in the day, and we had a chartered arrival that we followed onto an ILS for runway 7. Mountainous terrain rising to the south of us, and it was pretty cool. Very, very green. Like I mentioned, very humid. And the runway 7 had MSA, which for those not familiar with instrument flight rules, we always brief the MSA, the minimum sector or safe altitude. And we want to talk about that because in the event that we lose navigation in instrument conditions, we're having a really bad day. Okay. What are you going to do? Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to use your best ability to remain clear of terrain. And we need to know what the minimum altitude that we need to be at, depending on what sector we are in reference to either the airport, the co-located VOR, or other point as defined by the MSA. And in that area, the MSA to the north and the east is about 2,600 feet. Not bad. But when you look at the MSA to the south, it's 4,600 feet. And the airport's at sea level. So it rises very quickly. So yeah, so when you look at it, you do not want to go south of the localizer on this approach.
Right.
I mean, they even have a potential arc that you can fly to get onto the localizer. We did it visually, and it was a beautiful day. It was some rain showers, as I mentioned, off to the south over the mountains. And by the time we landed, it was dry. By the time we got to the gate, it started raining pretty good. It lasted about 10 minutes, and then I got to do my walk around.
Wow.
So there's nothing really super special about overflying these international quadrants. The main thing is that you understand the terms, you understand the language barriers that are there, and more importantly, if you're flying these routes for a company, you want to ensure that you've read all the company pages, because sometimes there are mandatory reports that you have to give, or sometimes there's a fix that they sometimes forget to hand you off. And you need to call that fix. Like I know going down in Mexico City, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, there are particular fixes that when you get to them, they want you to contact them 5 minutes prior to that fix. And if the air traffic controller that's handling you at this particular time is busy or forgets, they may not hand you off 5 minutes prior. So now you're kind of juggling two radio frequencies. And you'll have to say to the pilot flying, hey, I'm off frequency. I'm going to contact, Mexico City Center or what have you. We're 5 prior to this fix. It's a mandatory call. And then they'll say, okay, call us when you're over the fix. So they call back. And then if you didn't get handed off, you have to tell air traffic control, hey, we're over ABCDEFG fix, ready for our handoff. And they'll go, oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah. You clear to contact. So there's a lot going on when you're flying in international destinations.
That's right.
Yeah, and you've had quite a bit of experience with this too, Rob. What was your latest experience in Mexico City?
Yeah, Mexico City, nothing really honestly out of the ordinary for this particular trip. However, we did get an odd clearance on the arrival, and it was due to traffic and spacing. And you did mention, which was very important, that we use clear, concise communications. The company wants to make sure we stick to the ICAO standards of communication. ICAO meaning it's another acronym. Aviation's full of acronyms, right? ICAO was an International Civil Aviation Organization. So it's basically a bunch of countries come together and they agree to use these standards amongst the countries, so that and English language is one of them. Yeah, that's one of the standards. But also phrases, the phrases that we use, cleared for takeoff, or line up and wait. These are all phrases that are standard across the industry, not only in our country, but also in other countries. So anyway, one thing that I've never actually had before was this particular clearance arriving into Mexico City yesterday. And the particular clearance was turn left. We were on the Mexico airport's arrival, and we're descending, and we're complying with air altitude and airspeed restrictions on the arrival. And at one particular fix, the controller clears us. They say, Legacy 123. Upon reaching this fix, turn left heading 150. Fly heading 150 for 3 minutes. And after 3 minutes, turn direct to this fix. And I looked at the captain and I was like, did I hear what I just hear? I mean, did you hear what I just heard? Fix, heading, 3 minutes, turn back. He's like, yeah, that's what I heard too. I was like, okay, let me read it back. So I made sure I got it right the first time. And obviously you could always query and ask them to clarify the clearance. But we did exactly that. We hit the fix, turned left to heading I think it was 150. Flew that heading for 3 minutes, and at 3 minutes we turned back and headed towards the following fix.
Yeah.
And I felt that it was prudent at when we started to turn back to the after we flew for 3 minutes back to the other fix. I figured it'd be a recommended call to say, hey, Legacy 123 is turning direct to this fix, and we're 15 miles east of the fix, or whatever. And they're like, okay, Roger. And then they actually cleared us for the approach from that point. They said after crossing this fix. What's that?
Was it St. Lucia or something like that?
That was one of the fixes on the arrival, but it was actually one or two fixes prior to that. So they basically sent us over those high mountains, the high terrains, east of kind of just north of Puebla. Remember, we used to fly into Puebla,
Querétaro, all those good locations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but they gave us a further clearance and actually cleared us for the approach, which was a DME arc into an ILS to Mexico City. So it was a kind of a first time for me for that particular kind of clearance. So it was very, very, I wasn't ready for it. So that's one of the things when you flying aviation, there's kind of a cadence to some of the clearances, and you kind of know exactly what's going to come next. Or even if you don't know exactly what's going to come next, they usually come in a certain time or a certain order. And apologize, my dog's tail is wagging up against the table there. But anyway, they come, and they come in a certain order that you can repeat them back very easily. So when this clearance came, which was a non-standard kind of clearance, with a heading and a time and a turn to another, we rarely get that stuff in the United States, if in fact ever, especially with the invention of all these RNAV arrivals and departures. So that really threw us for a loop. Weren't quite ready for that. And so I was made sure that, we were ready to do it. And with the standard of English being spoken, and, the Mexican controller issuing the clearance, it was very important that, they used the proper phraseology and I understood it, and I flew it according to their request. So yeah, it worked out okay. But that's pretty much my experience. And unfortunately, I'm not a internationally, so to speak, trained pilot for our company. So, I'm not in the international division. So I haven't gone to any of those schools or anything like that. So I'd like to, but I think that's something that's kind of in the works for us for the 737 stuff. I know in Miami and I think New York, they're already a combined division, but I look forward to learning a lot more about that stuff, because you and a lot of other, even the captains I've flown with, they've flown internationally before, and actually some of them are international pilots too. So they talk about some of that stuff, and I find it intriguing. But
Well,
I'll
wait a
get to it
minute.
when I
How
do.
can you be a domestically rated pilot and not fly international, but yet here you are going into Mexico City? Let's talk a little bit
Mexico.
about that.
Yeah, it's a good
So,
question. Yeah.
Canada and Mexico, since it's all part of North America, has been
Right.
deemed to be within the same continent and therefore is not a requirement to be an internationally qualified pilot in order to fly into these cities.
Exactly.
Now, it's potential that they can be, for some carriers, what they call SARA airports,
That's right.
which
And
means you
Mexico
have to
City is one of
have
them.
a check airman with you in some qualifications. Sometimes you just have to watch a short video that's online that gives you terrain and pictorials on what to look at. Sometimes you just have to look at the pictorial pages and make a computer entry, and then that automatically qualifies you for 12 months. As long as you've had a landing there within the last 12 months, you continue your qualification. So it just depends on what's
The level
required and
or-
what's
yeah.
not, and every company is going to have their own requirements. Now, you mentioned something that is key, and you didn't say the words, but you mentioned exactly what it is. You received a clearance that you didn't expect. And that creates what's called expectation bias. This is something that we
right.
study about at the airline level, and I had not ever heard this, at least in my training. I don't think anyone's ever talked to me about this. I don't remember it, but there is an expectation bias. When you fly a particular flight or you fly in an airplane or anything, and you do the same thing day in, day out, hundreds, if not thousands of times, and all of a sudden, somebody throws you a curveball.
Yep.
And you could even read it back. Oh, turn left for 3 minutes and then fly directly to a fix. And you were like, what? Right? Your ears go up and you're like, I did not expect to hear that.
I heard it, but I wasn't listening.
Right. And you might even, if you're kind of tired and you're not really paying attention, you just read it back. Oh, yeah, left 3 minutes. Fix it. And then the other pilot, if they're paying attention, like, wait, what? So expectation bias is the belief that you know in advance what you will see or hear, which affects what you actually think you see and hear. Expectation bias in ATC means that there is a strong belief or mindset that a particular outcome will happen, or there's a particular cause for a situation, even when there is evidence to the contrary. Expectation bias is reinforced by previous experiences of situations which have features in common with the current situation. And this is right out of the ICAO definition of their aviation glossary of expectation bias. So that can bite you.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? You just jarred my memory about something that went through my thought process after receiving that clearance. You may have picked up on it on my earlier comment about flying into Mexico. It was really smoggy and overcast. You know, it's just the visibility was very poor. I think where they were down to, I think they said 3 to 5 miles or something like that.
Typical Mexico City,
typical Mexico day. I mean, it's just the way the
smog,
where the city sits and the smog and the industrial stuff there. But even due east of the airport in the mountains, they had some buildups and stuff like that. But what triggered jarred my memory, what I was going to talk about was as soon as we started on that vector, I immediately started to think about terrain, because you're no longer on the arrival, which provides terrain clearances as long as you're adhering to the profile of the arrival. So as soon as we got turned off the arrival, I immediately went into our charts and said, okay, you know, the MSA, the sector altitude, the grid mora in this area is, 14.5. So let's make sure we don't go any lower than, let's call it 16,000. That way we have a little buffer, and you can see it on our terrain display, the red peaks of the mountains starting to become prominent on our screen. And, that's something that you kind of have to rely on your training to remember that, if you're ever given that situation, that Mexico doesn't necessarily always provide terrain clearance.
No.
So they will gladly descend you, or not, I wouldn't say gladly, that's probably the wrong way to put it, but they will issue you a descent clearance well below the altitude of terrain,
Yes.
of, let's say, mountains and stuff like that. So you are responsible as an aviator for knowing exactly where you are at all times, and knowing the terrain in the area at all times, and declining any clearance that will put you into harm's way or possible contact with terrain. So anyway, that was very, very prominent in my mind, because you couldn't see the ground, you couldn't see the terrain. I mean, they had the what's the AirMet Sierra mountain obscurations,
Oh yeah.
right? So that was definitely the weather phenomena that was happening in that area. So anyway, yeah, I
Is that
just
when you
wanted to
looked
make
to the
sure.
captain and said, "What's a goat doing up here, Captain?"
Yeah, I was gonna say, why are they pulling? Why is that goat pulling a trailer up here?
No, honestly, the MORAs and the MSA. You mentioned the minimum safe or sector altitude.
Minimum sector altitude,
and
yep.
the MORAs.
Grid
While you
MORA.
were talking about it, I was looking at it and I looked it up. The Mexico City airport has an elevation of 7,316 feet MSA, which is up there. And we have to have specially certified aircraft that are able to land and take off in elevations like that. Not every single aircraft in the fleet can land at an airport at 7,316.
Right.
And then you were talking about, okay, well, the minute they gave you that vector, fly this heading for 3 minutes, now you're no longer on an established portion of your arrival. So
Correct.
your first reaction, which was, I absolutely applaud you, because I know a lot of pilots that they're like, okay, sure, okay, it must be safe. They gave it to us, okay. But the truth is, you got to look at that, and with a click of a button or a touch of the screen, you can actually pull up your MORAs in Mexico City. The grid MORA just to the northeast of the airport, 19.5.
Yep.
To the west,
I saw that one.
18.1.
Yep.
And to the southwest, it's, again, 19.5. Yep. So, yeah, there's some hills up there. There might be some goats in them there, bushes and trees.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, most people don't realize Mexico City's airport elevation is, you may have it there, but it's like 7,500 feet.
7316.
7316.
Yeah.
So, our cabin was already pressurized to the elevation of the airport from the top of the descent.
Yeah.
So we're beginning our approach procedures, our initial and everything, at well above 12,000 feet, which is super high, performance. I mean, our performance, like any airplane, is degraded, with altitude. So, those are things you have to keep in mind, and some, experience definitely comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
When flying into these kind of airports, because one thing that you will notice that's very, very obvious and evident on an approach to these airports, and with a airliner, is your descent rates are a lot higher on the final approach. You're close to 1,000 feet per minute, when normally you're about 700 to 800 feet per minute.
Right.
And your ground speed, your true airspeed, is a lot faster, a lot higher, because the air is thinner. You need to move across the ground a lot faster. So, our approach speed, I think we were pretty close to our maximum landing weight of 146,000 pounds. I think our final approach speed was about 160 on the 7.3, and we were our true airspeed, we were close to 170, 180 on our knots across the ground, crossing the threshold. So we were pretty high. We were going really fast, 20 to 30 knots faster than what you normally do. So you chew up a lot of air, a lot of runway, landing and decelerating up there. And then plus, like we said, performance is a big thing. Thrust reversers they work, but they don't do very much
They're not as
at that
effective.
altitude.
Yeah.
Not as effective. So
Yeah.
you're getting on the brakes right away and slowing your plane down.
Yeah, and they have two, parallel runways there in Mexico City. I believe
They
you
do.
mentioned that you were doing, I think, 2-3 left.
Oh, we have 5 right. We did 5
Oh, you did
right.
5 right? Okay, so 2-3 left was the longer one that they have.
Yep.
12,549 feet.
Yep.
And 5 right, because of a displaced threshold, 11,581 feet. So the runways are longer than usual simply because they're at a high elevation.
They need it. If you said, the displaced threshold was what 12, 11,000, whatever
in that direction. Yeah.
So whatever it was, to us, it really felt like a 7,000 or 6,000 foot long runway. Because we were touching down and decelerating, and we had to get on the brakes really good just to decelerate and make the last turn off. So
And have you been using the AMM view of the Jeppesen airport diagram? That's the.
Say that one more time.
Have you been using the AMM view?
Yes.
Yeah, that one's really cool because when you look at the chart for 5 right in Mexico City. On the 10-9, which is the chart that we would normally look at. If you look at the front page and you don't flip it over to look at the back page, which you should, but it says, hey, the runway is 13,074 feet long. And you're like, hey, well, the runway is 13,000 feet. I'm happy. But there's a displaced threshold. And traditionally, you would have to flip the page over or, scroll to the next page to find out what the LDA is, the landing distance available. But now with the AMM, you just tap on the runway identifier, the 05 right, and it tells you right there, LDA, 11,581 feet.
That sure is a nice feature.
Yeah, so that's 1,500 feet.
I'm starting to find more and more features on that AMM that I like versus the 10-9 chart.
The only downside is they don't have a legend with frequencies. Otherwise, I could just keep that up.
Yeah, so the one thing that I learned that you can do, though, is you can go to the COM button on the AMM. And when you select the COM button, all the frequencies populate. But if you know which COM frequencies that you're going to use, you can touch on it and it'll turn green.
Oh.
So you can kind of highlight the frequencies that you're going to possibly be using so that, if you're going to be on north ground, you can highlight the north ground. So when you land, just touch the COM, here it pops up, and then the
circle
ground is right there. So you know which frequency to have. Usually you have those queued up anyways and ready to go. But as you're taxiing around or whatever, the AMM map, it's not as easy to go. Slide the thing over. Okay, this is the ground frequency. Let's just tune that in and be ready to go.
Man, you done learned me something today, my friend.
There you go, man. It's all trial and error. No, it's okay. You'll get it next time, Tony.
Well, now I wanted to dive into something very close to your heart. Something special. Something that just makes you smile every time you think of it. And that is the latest and the greatest about the 737 MAX.
Oh, fantastic. Let's talk about it.
So American Airlines recently has sent out a information to their pilots. There's, according to an article here in Flight Global, dated on the 22nd of September by John Hemmerdinger. It says here that American Airlines pilots will begin 737 MAX special training in November in preparation for the jet's return to service, with the company's entire complement of 737 pilots expected to complete the reviews by January of 2021. Their union, the Allied Pilots Association, which represents Americans' cockpit crews, disclosed the time frame in a message to members on the 21st of September, a development coming as Boeing works to get the jet back to the skies. Now, the 737, as most of our viewers and most of the people in America were bombarded with this information prior to the pandemic. This was big. It really affected Boeing. Major losses financially. The pandemic just added fuel to the fire. And there was a question for a period of time that maybe Boeing might not recover. So this is very, very good news for the
It is.
company. Yeah,
Yes,
Boeing has
sure
also
is.
said that it expects the Federal Aviation Administration, they will certify the MAX, which they haven't done yet, which has
Right.
been grounded since March of 2019 in the fourth quarter of this year. So sometime before the end of the year, they're anticipating that the FAA will certify the MAX for return to service. Prior to flying the jet, Americans pilots must complete a distance learning training module, which will take place for about an hour and 40 minutes to run to completion time. They must also complete about a 3-hour flight simulator session, which includes an hour of briefing and a 2-hour of sim time, flying what we call the box.
Right.
So this is pretty big. American currently
is.
has 1,700 pilots that will complete the training as early as November. So the ball is rolling on this.
Yep.
We could see the 737 MAX back in the air by early of 2021. And what are your thoughts, Rob? As a 737 pilot for Legacy Airlines, do you think this is going to be a good step for them to get that aircraft back in the air?
Well, no doubt. No doubt. I think it's, obviously long awaited, long anticipated, highly scrutinized. Max is, I believe it's ready to return to service. I feel that this airplane is going to be the safest airplane in the skies after everything it's been through with the regulators, the FAA, Boeing, all the people scrutinizing the company, the management, the software, the engineers, everything. This is going to be probably one of the safest airplanes, if not the safest airplanes flying around right now. Let's face it, the Boeing 737 is a trustworthy, the basic airplane is a very, very trustworthy airframe. Many companies fly it. Legacy Airlines has, I forget how many they have, 200, 230, I forget how many they have, but they have a whole bunch of them. One of the largest operators, and obviously Southwest is they only fly 737s. So it's a great airplane, and no airplane is immune to problems. But this design is basically, I think they started in the late 60s, and it's still around. So it's a proven design, trustworthy design. With all that being said, I think it's ready to go. Honestly, to be fully honest, so I being the pilot that I've flown the Max when it first came out, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great flying airplane. Of course, knowing now what was wrong with the airplane, I feel that obviously it needed some modifications and fixing, and looks like it's gone through that process and then some. And so I'm looking forward to getting in the plane again and flying it again. It's a great flying airplane. It flies really well, and I think that it remains to be seen what they're going to teach us in the training. So looking forward to seeing that. I think they're probably obviously going to talk about the what happened in the two previous accidents, and what was the problem, and what the fix was, and what are the changes to the how do we operate the airplane with these changes. So it'd be pretty neat to see that. We will be able to test those out ourselves in the simulator, and I would imagine the majority of the sim time will be spent learning how to deal with those situations that have been a problem for the Max in the past. So the airplane, the Max, is fundamentally the same as all the other airplanes, with the exception of some of this flight computer software in it. So we'll be definitely learning the new changes, and how our checklists and policies and procedures will address the new operation of the airplane. So it's going to be fun. I can't wait to fly it again. It's a good airplane. It really is. And it's a shame that they've had to, park them for, I guess, 2 years.
Yeah, it's been a long
So,
time.
yeah.
And it's really meant to take over to help retire some of the older aircraft that have a lot of total time on the airframe. So the sooner they get this thing rolling, the better it's going to be for the companies out there that are flying it, both here in the U.S. and overseas. Yeah. And as we're sitting here talking about this, we've had some late breaking news.
What?
That's right. As we're sitting here talking, Legacy Airlines has sent out an email to all of their pilots indicating that the 737 MAX 8 update indicates that on September 21st, the FAA closed the public comment period on the MAX return to service, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the NPRM, because we need more acronyms. We must have more acronyms.
We need that.
One of the items outlined in the NPRM is to revise the existing airplane's flight manual, or the AFM, and they're going to do that and incorporate news and revised flight crew procedures. The FAA must still address all the comments prior to release of the final AD, Airworthiness Directive, expected in October. So we could potentially see an AD on this aircraft in October. So all the airlines that own these airplanes will be able to incorporate whatever needs to be taken care of. And I'm sure they'll do that relatively quickly. When the AD compliance is completed and the final FSB report is published, the aircraft can be ungrounded and training plans approved for the return to service for airlines. So
there you go.
They're anticipating this thing to roll out relatively quickly.
Yep.
The company also indicates that over the next few months or so that these steps are going to be finalized and completed with, and expect an active information rollout for all of our flight crews. But until then, if you have any questions, blah, 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 contact the people that are in charge. So
that was timely. Yeah.
You know, as we're sitting here talking about it, my phone just went, ding, you got mail.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. I like I just said, it's highly anticipated. Every 737 pilot that I talked to, they look forward to flying the plane again. Nobody's afraid to fly it. The pilots that have flown the airplane love it. The pilots that have flown the MAX love it.
Yeah,
it's a nice improvement from, like you said, the older 737s. The screens are more easier to look at. They still provide the same information as the other airplanes do. Just the original the 737s that we fly now, they have 6 screens on them, and the MAX, I believe it only has 3 of them, so 3 big screens.
3 big ones.
Yep, 3 big ones. And so all the information that was on the 6 LCD screens are now presented on the 3 I think they're LED screens now. So instead of LCD, they're LEDs. So they're.
Did you get the new touchscreen ones?
No, I wish we did. That'd be nice.
Every pilot wishes for that, because every time I get in an airplane, every single monitor has fingerprints all over them, which drives me freaking nuts, man.
Yeah, I know. Doesn't that drive you nuts?
And you know what?
And then when the sun hits it just right,
you
get that glare and the smudgy fingerprints, and you just can't see anything.
Yeah, you know what it is.
Yeah,
they go, "What's it doing? Look right there," and they put their finger on the right there. What's it doing?
Big oil array around the thing. Got to push it harder to see. Oh, look, colors.
Personally, I think it's the maintenance technicians. They come in and go, "Well, we're looking for 8 quarts. Let me put my finger on it until it gets to 8." Like, what?
Yep.
So, no, but good. So I'm excited to see the MAX return. I've never had a major issue with the MAX. As a matter of fact, I can remember one of my first posts flying in the back. I was deadheading, landing in Miami, and this was during the whole argument that they're going to ground this aircraft because of the 2 crashes. And I made a posting. I'm like, "Hey, man, I'm deadheading on the back of this thing. I feel totally safe. I'm sure that our pilots here at Legacy Airlines and across the U.S. have been trained accordingly, and the airplane is perfectly safe." Because at the time, a lot of passengers were like, "Oh my God, is it safe? Oh no, it's the MAX. Get me off this plane. I won't fly on it." And like you said,
there's a lot of unknown
the
going on. Yeah,
that airplane is going to be so scrutinized at this point. By the time it comes back, you know, the 737, what they're calling it, the 800M or something like that.
Yeah, I forget. They didn't call it the Dash 8.
The Dash
I
8,
think that's,
yeah.
I think, which we already have there was already an
Did they
airplane
have
out
one?
there that was
Yeah.
called the Dash 8, but I don't know if they still fly those around here anymore. But yeah, I think that's the new PR change. They're going from calling it the Max to the Dash 8.
Yeah. So let's see what happens. I feel perfectly safe, as do you. And you get to fly it. So
yeah,
that'd be cool to do like a live post from getting ready to fly this bad boy.
Yeah, that's actually a good one. Maybe I can arrange it or just kind of sneak it in there. But most people don't realize that my IOE, my first flight in a 737 was on a Max.
Oh.
So, and this is probably not good news for anybody listening, but or any of my passengers that were on that particular flight. But my first flight in the Boeing 737 Max on IOE was also the Czech Airmen's first flight on the Max. Remember when we first got them, the only people that were allowed to fly them were the Czech Airmen's.
Right.
So when I met my Czech Airman in the crew room in LaGuardia for our meet and greet, and then hey, let's go fly. The team from Legacy Airlines was in the crew room with all of the training material for the Max, because they were supposed to be there to brief all the Czech airmen. So, hey guys, let's make sure we remember some of the little differences that are in this airplane that you need to know about before you go fly the new airplane and take it to the skies. And let's do a quick refresher here in the crew room before we head out and fly the airplane. So that was my IOE experience. Was here we are at the Czech Airmen, and
wow.
I was like, what? And I didn't even know I was going to fly a Max, because I hadn't quite gotten to the point of my training where in our reading our schedules, it tells you what kind of airplane exact aircraft it is. So the numbers didn't jive with hey, this number is a Max. So I just showed up, and he's like, oh, we're going to be flying a Max today. And I was like, oh, cool. Great. Should be fun. Looking forward to it. Can't wait. So that's all we heard about in the
was
schoolhouse.
The response on the rollout the typical IOE response that you would get from your passengers from the rollout?
No, I don't think they even had a clue that they were on a brand new airplane. They just got off, because we flew to Miami from New York, and I think they got off the airplane and went on their cruises and didn't care what they were on, or
no,
they were just happy to be there.
I truly believe that after one of your landings, regardless if it was IOE or whatnot, the response would have been appropriate.
What is it? Oh, I figured I like the response of no response. Like, they didn't even know the plane landed, just rolled the tires onto the runway.
Oh yeah.
Show up at the gate, and they're like, wow, I didn't even know we landed. That was a good job.
That's very good. That's very good. That's what I expect.
Every time.
It's not what I get.
No.
It's what I expect.
Yeah, I usually get full 8 feet of landing gear extension travel on my landings.
One last thing before we wrap it up here today, I just wanted to mention a big thank you to the Airline Pilot Guy podcast. I've been listening to their show now for quite some time. Their show is quite an inspiration. They've been on the air for a very long time, and they're just a great group of people talking about aviation incidents and accidents. They break them down, kind of call the BS flag on some of these agencies that are reporting on the particular incident. They also have a very great community over there of people that just love aviation. And it's a pleasure to listen to their show. I've written in a few times and sent them some audio feedback, which I encourage all of you out there to do the same for us. And we'd love to air that on the show as well. So a big thank you to the APG. I was recently had them read a little letter that I sent them on episode, what was it, 443, I think it was, that I mentioned.
That sounds right.
And they're very, very kind and gracious to read that feedback and kind of plug our show here at Squawk Ident. So big thank you to Captain Jeff and Nick and Steph and Miami Rick, and of course Liz, their producer. What a great group. So I look forward to listening to the future shows and to participate in their community involvement. We encourage you to also get involved with us. In the future, we do have, as soon as this pandemic and restrictions start to fade away with time, we would also like to have some meetups here with the Squawk Ident crew. If you're kind of curious, you're listening to the audio only podcast and you kind of want to see who we are, good way to do that is check out our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel can be found at Av8rTony and Squawk Ident, and of course that's AV the number 8 RTONY and Squawk Ident podcast. There you can check out some very short clips. It's a lot of work to kind of edit this podcast down and pull out all the little dead air and all the things that we say, want to re-say it again and whatnot. So we try to produce a podcast that is pleasing to listen to with not a lot of ums and ahs like some of the other podcasts out there that we may have listened to or stumbled across. Drunk guys in a basement is really funny, but there's only so much you can listen to. Drunk guys in a basement.
Drunk guys in a cockpit. No, forget it. That'd be a bad podcast. We can't do that one. Sorry.
That's not
Scratch
one of ours. Good idea, though. Also, now something really exciting has happened to podcasting. There's so many podcast players out there that are a great place to get your favorite podcast. We particularly like the Apple Podcasts and the Spotify and the Google players and whatnot. But now Amazon is getting into the mix. You've heard of Amazon Music, all those Prime members out there. Get free Amazon Music and Amazon Video. Well, now Amazon Music, if you download the update to their app, they now have Amazon Music and Podcast. And I've been in contact with them over the past few weeks. They had us fill out some forms so that we could be featured on their release. And sure enough, all you gotta do is tell your Alexa to play Squawk Ident Podcast, and you'll hear the latest episode right there from your smart speaker. So check it out. Let us know what you think. And by all means, visit our website at www.Av8rTony.com. There you can download episode archives. If you don't do that from a player particularly, you can do it right there. You can see flight line photos from some of our special guests that we've had on the show. You might see something that inspires you to start your flying lessons today. And that's really what we're excited about. To get everyone out there that has an interest in aviation to take that first step. Hopefully we were giving you a little bit of what's involved here in the airline profession and all the struggles that we have to overcome on a daily basis. Rob, is there anything else that you want to get out there?
Thank you for everybody at the APG podcast again. I do listen to it regularly, and I do enjoy your podcasts, and I always look forward to the next show. And when I do get a chance, I do watch it on YouTube and Facebook Live. That's pretty fun to watch too. So yeah, thank you there. And it's been a good show. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here talking about what we love the most, aviation and everything aviation related, with you, Tony, and all of our guests. And I look forward to doing it again.
And I gotta say, thank you so very much for John H. for sending us a donation to the show.
Thanks, John.
In closing, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there. Be safe, be kind, and take care of each other. Bye, everyone.
See ya.